All right, so the Articles of Confederation is the first Constitution of the United States. It was first drafted July 12th, 1776. It was adopted by Congress November 15th, 1777. But the reason that I put this a little later in the lecture is because it is truly not fully satisfied or ratified until 1781. So if you look at the middle of your screen, it will show you the dates that each individual state or colony ratified. And it really just kind of created a loose confederation of sovereign states. It creates a weak central government. And there's a couple reasons that they do that. One, it has to be this way because the colonies have been independent of one another for so long. And the second reason is because of that, then they do need assurance that not one individual gains too much power. And not only that one individual doesn't gain too much power, that one state in particular doesn't gain too much power. So you can look down the list and you can see Maryland is the last one to ratify in 1781. And we're going to kind of look through these. But first, I want to introduce you to the two men who wrote this. One is Josiah Bartlett and the other is John Dickinson. And they come at the Articles of Confederation with two very different viewpoints, and which does kind of help balance things out. Now, Bartlett was from Amesbury, Massachusetts. He was a practicing physician in New Hampshire. He was a member of the colonial legislature. And he was an active advocate against British oppression. He was the commander of a militia regiment. He represented New Hampshire at the Continental Congress. He was the second to sign the Declaration of Independence behind John Hancock. He was later elected as the governor of New Hampshire. So Bartlett is very strong in his convictions toward independence from Britain. Now, Dickinson, on the other hand, and if you think back to the previous lecture that you listened to, I talked about how some of the colonists were very careful to, and some of them completely resisted joining with the colonists in their quest for independence because they were loyal to Britain. And we talked about one of the reasons that was because they depended on that aristocracy, on that monarchy to be who they were. And that's what we see with Dickinson. Dickinson was from Maryland. He was educated in London. He was born to a moderately wealthy family. He studied law. In 1764, he was a member of the Pennsylvania Assembly, and he wrote Letters of a Pennsylvania Farmer. 1774, he attended the First Continental Congress, and he did oppose separation with Britain, and he worked very hard to temper the action and language of the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. He was appointed a brigadier general in the Continental Army, which was the lowest ranking general, and he had a very brief military career. Okay, right now, if you have not printed out a copy of the Articles of Confederation that I have provided online, I want you to pause this. I want you to either print out the articles, or you can print out the PowerPoint here, whatever works for you to be able to make some comments. Actually, the PowerPoint for this isn't uploaded, so don't do that. But have some way that you can make some comments. I'm not going to read all of this to you. You are grown-ups. You can read this yourself. I would suggest you do so because this will be part of your Blackboard discussion for the week. But I'm going to kind of give you an overview as to what these are about, so it can kind of help. So the first article, the style. Style is another word of title. It's simply, Article 1 is simply giving this new nation a title. So it is the United States of America. So that one's pretty easy. Article 2 is basically sovereignty, meaning supreme power. So the supreme power still remains in the state. rather than with the federal government. So it creates strong states, and this must happen in order for them to be okay with this. And basically, so each area keeps its own entity. Article 3, thing that I really want you to take away from this is that firm league of friendship. In other words, they're going to help one another out when the time arises. If one state needs protection, they are going to make a promise to one another to be there and assist if needed. Article 4. Article 4 is, while the other articles do refer to the states as separate entities, Article 4 does discuss them as a nation. So this one unifies and kind of creates that national feeling. One big thing to look at with this is note that it does discuss the difference of land ownership versus those who are tenants. That is a huge difference in the way they are treated. But it also means that as they travel from state to state, they do not need papers. In other words, they don't have to have a passport in order to travel from state to state. They can move and be citizens all the way around without a process of naturalization. So moving to another state, they're not going to be treated like a foreigner if they do so. And it also establishes that there's no sanctuary states for criminals. Georgia often was referred to as kind of that place where criminals kind of landed. So this kind of eliminates that some. Article 5, one of the things to look at with this is it does establish the term limits. It talks about the Continental Congress, that the people are only represented indirectly. So that's kind of your key takeaways there. Article 6 is kind of lengthy, but it is setting out the limits of the state. So, for example, no state shall engage in any war without the consensus of the United States. So you can't just say, hey, we're gonna kick off a war and expect everyone to come and aid you. So that's kind of what's going on there. Article 7 is specifically in regard to the militia and how the militias will be raised, which puts that in the state's hands. The state shall they will fill those vacancies for leadership and things like that. Article 8, one problem that we see with Article 8 is the national government does not have any means to enforce any state to pay any taxes. And that is going to be one of the downfalls of the articles, is the fact that basically they left no way for the federal government to operate financially, and that is going to be a problem. Article 9, this says see handout. This is a very long article. You're not going to have a handout on this one, but it will be in your article, so make sure you look at it. Basically, it sets out what Congress can and cannot do. They can declare war and peace. They can send and receive ambassadors. They can make treaties, power to grant marquises. They do have the authority to regulate currency, which is good, because without that authority to regulate currency, then you have this problem if one person moves from or is traveling from one state to the other. If you don't have a common currency, then it does create problems with travel. They can establish post office, make rules for naval and land forces. They can borrow money. They can build and equip a navy, determine the size of the army, arm and equip the army. They also will serve as a court of appeals between states who are in dispute. It delegates the Speaker of the House. Now, something I want you to pay attention to is they do call the Speaker of the House the President. So for extra credit, there's going to be a place where you can turn in your extra credit online on Blackboard for 10 points extra credit if you will find who the original presidents were who were technically the speakers of the House, but they are also considered presidents. If you can find who all those were, write it up in a list and send it to me. This also, Article 9 sets up that they were required to meet once a year and publish all those proceedings. Article 10 is one of my favorite articles, and this is in reference to Canada. And you can kind of see where the U.S. is maybe a little concerned having the French and the British right up to the north of them. And basically what this article says is at any time if Canada wants to become part of the United States, they can, I got ahead of myself here, guys. I'm talking about Article 11. They can join the Union without anyone having to vote on it. It's basically a standing invitation for them to be able to do that. Back to Article 10. Article 10 is it's a very short article. Go ahead and read this one. Basically setting forth the powers of Congress and such. Article 12, if there's any debts before the Articles of Confederation were adopted, they are payable by the federal government, which again is going to be an issue because they have no way to enforce any taxes. Article 13 is another kind of lengthy one, but that the states are bound to this agreement. The Union is perpetual, and changes must be agreed on by Congress and all 9 states. So in conclusion, the big problems that we see with the Articles of Confederation is that there is no power of national taxation. There's no power to control trade. It creates a very weak executive branch. There is no power to enforce legislation. So if you have not given yourself any power to enforce anything, then if your parents say, hey, you have to be in by midnight, and then they do not give any penalties for that, do you really pay any attention to it? It's kind of that same idea here. The main responsibility of the federal government was to control foreign policy and to create treaties. The states maintain the power of taxation, the raising of the militias. And there is still that they can still issue currency, which even though that left it where the federal government could regulate currency, there's still this issue that they can issue currency. So, but the big thing to note with the Articles of Confederation is it served as a transition from the Revolutionary War until the Constitution. So they did have something in place to kind of help transition while they got things a little more together.